Hello and welcome to the Canyon Chaser's Garage. Today we're going to be talking about what it takes to remove and replace a front wheel. If you've had your motorcycle long enough to need new tires, you know that having the shop remove your wheels for a tire change can add a lot of money to an already fairly expensive ordeal. But to remove a front tire on itself is actually fairly easy. So let's get started. The very first step is we need to get the front wheel off the ground. Either you can do this with like a traditional front stand. There's front stands that hold up underneath the lower triple clamp. But whatever you need to do, you need to make sure the motorcycle, the front wheel is off the ground and that the bike is stable. We're going to be playing with a little bit. We don't want it to fall over on top of us. So safety first. The first step is we need to remove the brake calipers. This is a traditional brake mounting point. Some are radial where the bolts come in from the back of the wheel. In either case, the process is going to be the same. We're just going to loosen and remove both of the caliper retaining bolts and remove the calipers. With modern motorcycles, the front brake's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There's not a whole lot of room between the caliper and the wheel. So one thing we like to do to kind of make sure we don't snarf things up is we like to put a little bit of tape on the inside of the rim. And then as you take the caliper off, be really, really careful. If we torque or twist too much on the caliper trying to remove it, we're going to end up bending our front disc. So just take your time, be patient, and kind of take it apart like you would a puzzle. On the bottom of your fork, there's going to be pinch bolts that hold the axle in place to keep it from rotating. We're only going to loosen one side, then the other side. We're going to start with this side, and then we're going to loosen this nut. If we loosened both sides, the whole axle would just spin and we wouldn't be able to loosen anything. So the pinch bolts also do not need to be removed all the way. They just need to be loosened enough to relieve the stress on the aluminum bottom so that everything will spin. Next, we're just going to loosen this nut on the end. It shouldn't be on super tight. If it's on too tight, what it's going to do, it's going to pinch your fork legs in. We just want to loosen it and then take it off. Next, we're going to loosen the pinch bolts on the other side. It's a good idea when working with pinch bolts to do one and then the other one a little bit at a time. If you do all of one and then the other one, you'll end up with a twist in the soft aluminum. So when you remove them and tighten them, just go like at most at one turn each at a time. The next step is to tap the axle out of the front of the bike. You want to tap on it, but you don't want to tap on it with anything metal. So this is a good place to get what's called a loaded hammer. Inside the hammer it's sand, and then it's just soft plastic on the end. So when you're tapping on the aluminum, you're not damaging the threads. As with most things motorcycle, because things are made out of aluminum, we want to be nice and gentle, deliberate but gentle. So we're just going to tap on the axle, nice and lightly to get it started. Most axles are going to have a hole in the other end, so we can use a highly specialized tool to grab the axle and pull it out, a Phillips screwdriver. All we're going to do is we're going to slide the screwdriver through the hole, and then while we hold the wheel up so it doesn't fall and bend anything, we're just going to kind of twist and work the axle out, and it should just come right on out. With the wheel on the ground, now it's ready to take out. But before we do, check for any spacers that may be in the wheel and pull those out and set those aside. You don't want to lose those two from the shop. But now we should just be able to roll the wheel out, take it to the shop, and get our fresh tire. All right, and welcome back. We got our brand new tire mounted on the rim, the Dunlop Road Smart. Check our website for the review of that tire. Also, when you're transporting your wheel back and forth to the shop, be really careful that you don't do anything that's going to bend these rotors. Any kind of drop or slip or even laying it on its side can result in bending the rotor. The other thing now that we're ready to put it back together is make sure that you put the wheel in rotating the right direction. There will be marks on your tire, and a lot of wheels have marks on the wheel as well. You do not want to put your front tire in spinning the wrong direction. So we've already marked our wheel before we took it in. We'd use a Sharpie and mark our rotors, and we're going to slide it in so it's going to spin the proper direction. Before we roll the wheel back into place, we're going to make sure we put all of our spacers back into place so the wheel will line up again. Reinstalling the front wheel is a lot easier than the rear wheel. It's going to be a lot easier to kind of hold everything up in place. But the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to roll it back so everything's kind of lined up. And then we're just going to lift up the wheel and slide the axle back in. Don't worry about the calipers yet. Before we slide the axle back in, it's a good idea to put a little bit of grease on it so it doesn't get dry or get sticky when it's inside the bike. So what we've done is we've taken an old Manky paintbrush and just kind of stuck it in a can of bearing grease. And we're just going to pad a little bit on the axle, so it's going to slide in really nice. We also like to put the majority of it on the tip of it, because as we slide the axle in, it's going to push the grease back across the rest of the axle. As with most things, having someone to help out is helpful. But a front wheel you can usually do by your own. What I like to do is put my hand in, grab one of the spokes of the wheel, and I'm just going to lift the wheel up and slide the axle into the hole, and now we have a starting point. Once you get the wheel to this point, you may want to go back and use your loaded hammer to tap the axle in. Sometimes it won't require it though. The thing is, if you do use it, be careful that you're just going to tap the axle, not bang on it. If you bang on the axle and the wheel isn't lined up, it's going to destroy the threads on your axle as you bang it through. But what we want to do is we just kind of want to make sure everything's lined up, and we're just going to want to push it in. It doesn't want to go anymore by pushing it, so I'm going to grab my hammer, and I'm just going to gently tap it. Notice I'm not using a whole lot of force to get the axle back in. Now that the axle's back in place, we're just going to put the nut back on, but we're not going to tighten anything just yet. There's one final step we have to do before we tighten any of the bolts all the way. So we're just going to get it finger tight. Before we reattach the caliper, we've put tape back on our wheel so we don't scratch it. And we're going to take a nice big wide blade screwdriver and we're going to push these brake pads apart all the way. That's going to make it a lot easier to slide the rotor back, or the caliper back onto the rotor. With the pad spread, the tape in place, it should be a fairly easy process to put everything back into place. Again, be careful, take your time, and it should slide right in with no mess, no fuss. Finally, we'll take the caliper bolts and we're just going to kind of put them in, get everything started. Again, we're not going to tighten anything just yet. We're just going to get the bolt started and to hold the caliper in place, and then we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. With everything kind of back in place, the next step is we're going to snug up the pinch bolts on the one side so that the axle does not rotate. Again, back with pinch bolts, we want to move them just a little bit at a time together so that we don't get any twisting. Next, we want to clean up any of the excess grease that may have come off the axle when we put it into place. If we leave it here, it's just going to fling out and get all over your rotors, and grease on brake rotors do not equal good stopping distances. The one step that everybody seems to forget is, since we spread our brake pads apart, we're going to have to gently tap our front brake lever to bring our brake pads back up into contact with the rotors. It may take a little bit of pumping, but nice and gently just bring it in so you get nice brake pressure again. Alright, we have everything back together, but if you've been paying attention, you've noticed that we haven't really tightened any of the bolts yet. The final thing we want to do before snugging anything down is we want to squeeze the front brake and bounce up and down on the front of the motorcycle. That's going to compress and release our front forks several times. And when it does that, because the bolts are loose, it's going to help realign everything so everything's properly lined up with each other. What that does is that prevents any unnecessary stiction in your fork legs, as well as it makes sure that your brake calipers are properly aligned to your rotors. That's all for taking your front wheel on and off. I hope you've learned something from this. Be sure to check out our website. We have product reviews, travel maps, and lots more on canyonchasers.net.